out of this sacred silence, we give witness to voices that are often silenced. Our reconciliation process has intentionally started with centering the experiences of people often pushed to the edges of our community. I believe that healing requires us to name power dynamics and understand that the status quo is unequal and reproduces harm. I believe that the spiritual practice of reconciliation builds relationships grounded in love and accountability. I believe that repairing relationships is critical to the transformative change we seek, and that structural change is necessary for true repair. The Trust and Reconciliation Work Group started by deeply listening to over 40 congregants, many of whom who have struggled to maintain a spiritual home within All Souls. The purpose of today's service is not to seek closure, but rather to support us on being on this journey together. You are about to hear statements from people in our congregation. They are not the words of the people reading them now, but come from conversations we have had with members of our community. Each one represents what is on an individual's heart, and many reflect concerns we have heard multiple times. Some may be hard to hear. We ask that you lean into discomfort and honor that bearing witness is part of our collective journey toward wholeness.
I miss coming to Sunday services on a regular basis because I love the music and the sermons often resonate and offer a timely message. But I cannot enjoy the show if the events backstage are toxic.
We will throw a black person up there in the pulpit every now and then. It's super performative and lacks a lot of nuance for the lived experience of diverse people. Anti-blackness is at the core of what happened with Reverend Newton Moore. Anti-blackness is a particular type of harm that All Souls needs to deal with, and the whole world needs to deal with.
The experiences within All Souls Church in the Trump era further helped me understand the difference between white liberals and white progressives. White liberals can talk racial justice and do social justice work without stepping out of their white privilege and power and protection. This is sanitized social justice, and it can be just as harmful and hateful as in-your-face racism.
All Souls has been through several episodes over the last 20 years and longer that have been racialized, and that have also revealed the extent to which the leadership and administration of the church have been troubled by ineffectiveness. Beginning with the departure of Reverend Dan Aldrich in the late 90s up until now, there have been episodes with racial components that speak to very poor communication at best, and very poor cultural incompetence and structural racism at worst that are part of the All Souls culture.
An overemphasis on easy reconciliation created a dynamic where people aren't willing to stay with the tension and grapple with the deep pain and betrayal that is felt.
The church is not now my refuge or sanctuary. I had seen it as a place to get away from the ills of the world, but it is now reinforcing the ills of the world.
We, the board, went to that congregational meeting and we got crucified. None of us really expected the reaction we got when we were there to try to answer questions. I don't think we ever recovered from that.
I am hurt that other congregants, white members, don't see the ways the dynamics of the controversy affect a black woman. They move on with less discomfort.
I want church to be a community of people who understand why I hurt. But my experience is that people in the church are more interested in my helping them be comfortable than in understanding.
Preaching love and justice doesn't mean we're not susceptible to white supremacy, but we can fall and pick back up.
We stay because it is our church in the deepest possible way. Good morning. My name is Jose Santos Was. I first came to All Souls Church and was very pleasantly surprised. As a former Catholic, I'm sure many of you can relate, to find a church with a gay man and a black woman as clergy. They quickly became like family. That's why seeing Reverend Susan leave was heartbreaking. I was livid at the idea that Reverend Susan's sermons and her calm, warm pastoral care would be missing from my church. As I learned more, I became more angry and was done with this place. I was upset with Reverend Hardy's and the board for letting Reverend Susan go. I even started attending Quaker meeting. That was about as much clergy as I wanted. All the while, I participated with the Reverend Susan accountability team. I thank God for their care and attention during the crisis. That was the moral center of the church. I was done with All Souls. I couldn't take a sermon from Reverend Hardy's, so I kept attending Quaker meeting. A Muslim theologian taught me that seeing the world through a different faith can inform the grooves and details of your own. Through my experiences with the Quakers, I was confronted with my own wrongs and some terrible screw-ups in my past. I recall being held to account, but also held in love. It wasn't simply punishment for punishment's sake. I was truly held lovingly and accountably. I learned and I grew. The right path can be difficult at times. In community, we can help each other draw those lines and bring us back to center if we stray from the path. I returned to All Souls Church because of that community and accountability paired with love. We as a society don't do a very good job holding people accountable in love. We live in a society consumed with exacting a harsh punishment. We don't give guidance, general accountability, paired with truth that's needed for transformation. I still miss and think about Reverend Susan, but I want to see the transformation of this community. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Maria Elise Diamond, and this is the second time in 20 years I've been to church this early. Wow, there's a lot of morning people in this congregation. At the first Transformation Team Sunday service a few weeks ago, Paula Cole Jones asked us to reflect on the question, when the church breaks your heart, what is it that brings you back? While I could immediately name hope, history, heart as initial answers, more questions than answers flooded my mind. When you know the person sitting next to you in the pew has no awareness of the brokenness, what brings you back? When you have suffered so many wounds, what keeps your broken heart beating? When disappointment is deep, both in the leadership and in the congregants, what brings you to consider forgiveness? What can be forgiven? Who does the forgiving? And are we not all worthy of and required, if not by covenant, but by our shared humanity, to do both? Until our church crisis, which could be attributed to structural racism, white supremacy, ageism, sexism, lack of accountability, lack of transparency, arrogance, or all of these, I would have described myself as a regular churchgoer, but not involved. I attended church, but more as an observer rather than as a participant. Consciously or not, I stayed at a distance while deeply believing in the vision of All Souls and its commitment to building the beloved community. Reverend Rob and Reverend Susan's sermons were more than enough to keep me and others moving toward that vision, or so I thought. The immediate aftermath of Reverend Susan's departure and the reckoning that began in the church was also the time period that my 90-year-old mother started a deep decline after a decade of living with dementia, eventually dying last year. As those of you who have endured loss understand, every new loss brings back memories of prior losses. When I flew back to DC after my mother's funeral, a lifelong churchgoer who alternated between the ritual comforts of the Episcopalian Church of her childhood and the intellectual satisfaction of the Unitarian Church of her adulthood, my mind went back to 1999, when my husband died in his early 30s of a rare cancer, leaving me with my beloved 2-year-old Caleb to raise alone. A college friend sent me a letter asking if I was sitting in my house mourning with the curtains drawn, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, knowing what a terrible cook I was. She clearly was not yet a parent, much less of a 2-year-old. There is no time for mourning. Life goes on the next day with diapers to change, groceries to buy, and bills to pay. My heart was broken, but I had Caleb to raise. There was not time for sitting in dark rooms asking existential questions about why this happened and what I should do. Last year in April, that 2-year-old was a 21-year-old and a senior in college. I did not ask him to fly to Chicago for his grandmother's funeral because it was the beginning of his college senior week, which I wanted him to enjoy unencumbered. When my heart was broken, I could not bear to impose my pain on anyone else. I raised Caleb alone. I grieved for his father, mostly alone. I knew I could grieve for my mother alone. But what I could not do was come back to All Souls and continue the minutia of timelines, who did what when, who was on a growth plan, who needed to be on a growth plan, who was an angry black woman, who was a racist, who abused the congregation on social media, what were the facts, what were the lies, and what was the truth, because we all have our truth. For someone only minimally engaged with the church before, this was a conversation I found intolerable now, given the recent loss. A loss which I should probably explain was also complicated by issues of race, because race complicates everything. My grandmother was a graduate of Spelman, my grandfather a graduate of Morehouse. My mother fled the upper-class black Cincinnati community she was raised in for the more liberal northern city of Chicago because she wanted to ease the burdens of blackness. She was only marginally effective at this and spent most of her life extremely conflicted about race. Watching her struggle enabled me to be comfortable in my own skin. Reverend Newman was comfortable in her own skin and made visible the burdens of living while being a black female. That was a role model for me. Whether she was cueing a minister that the musical selection was Purple Rain in honor of Prince, or informing the congregation about the death of Marion Barry. She honored the imperfect. When she was teaching the congregation the Black version of Happy Birthday or quoting a Bible verse, she was creating a diverse, spirit-growing community. One Saturday afternoon, when I was worshiping at the altar of Target, my other church, I ran into Paula Cole Jones, who recognized me. So the police department doesn't need facial recognition software. They just need Paula Cole Jones. We began to talk. Before long, I don't know how this happened, but I had agreed to be part of what she called a working group. I didn't know what was more scary, the working part or the group part. Like James Baldwin, who said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced," she urged me to help the congregation face what needed to be changed. Paula is persuasive and perspicacious. Hesitant and reluctant, I attended meetings and very quickly realized that my voice was needed. Like the Reverend William Barber, Paula is a prophetic voice who is willing to be a critic of the church in order to push us to mend our flaws and become a more beloved community. If I did not heed this call, who would? Who would build the beloved community if not me? Through my work on the Trust and Reconciliation Committee, the tightly bound protective layers around my heart have begun to loosen. When the church breaks your heart, go to Target. Buy some duct tape. When someone is missing from your pew, find out why. Take the bandage off your heart and put it on someone else's. When disappointment in your leaders is deep, hold your leaders accountable. Today, my husband is still gone. My mother is still gone. Reverend Newman is still gone. But I am here, and you are here. We are here together. Please walk with me on the journey toward building a beloved community.
Good morning. The stress, pain, and anxiety caused by negative experiences related to race are a heavy weight that so many, too many, carry. The weight of each negative experience cumulative over a lifetime. I need church to be my sanctuary. I do not want it to be another manifestation of things that I experience in the outside world. I need it to be a haven for me to be who I am and to be respected and loved for it. And mostly, I need my children to experience the same and even more. When Reverend Susan no longer became a part of this church, my church, I was so hurt because she was the one person who wholly represented and understood my experience and would talk about it from the pulpit. And in 2017 and in the years since, I need this. On May 20th, 2017, the life of Second Lieutenant Richard Collins III was brutally and tragically ended at the hands of an alt-right follower in an act of unprovoked cowardice and lethal aggression. 2 days after being commissioned by the United States Army, and 2 days prior to his college graduation ceremony from Bowie State University, He was murdered on the campus of the University of Maryland, College Park. His murder was the primary injustice, but it is not the only one. The United States Army refuses to recognize Second Lieutenant Richard Collins III as a member of the armed forces because, while a commissioned officer who swore an oath to protect and serve this country, our country, he did not report to duty due to his murder. And therefore, he is not considered a member of the United States Army. While I did not know Richard, I am friends with his mother, Dawn. The shock of this promising, beautiful young man's death rocked me to my core. The pain his family and friends have experienced every moment since his senseless death, and the United States Army's position is incomprehensible. The fear that I and many other mothers of Black and brown sons have is real. And the pain of knowing we can do all of the things right and still cannot protect our sons in a way that should never even be needed is real. And so, once the drama unfolded regarding the departure of Reverend Susan, my attendance at church dwindled to non-existent. I could most definitely not have church be another source of stress in this way that causes me to feel so vulnerable. In April, the transformation team invited me to participate in an interview. And then they invited me to participate in a day-long workshop. And when I say they, I really mean Kyla. And then she asked me to come to the first Transformation Sunday. And when I came, each heartfelt speech moved me. And I began to think about church from a different perspective, given these multiple interactions. I thought about all of the hard work many committed, well-meaning, passionate people are doing because they want people who look like me to feel welcomed and safe in this place. And after some contemplation, I reached out to Kyla and asked for her help in securing support for the upcoming trial of Richard's murderer. And she responded in such a loving way, I knew I could invite Dawn, Richard's mother, to worship with me for the Ruby Bridges service. And she came. And we showed Dawn much love and kindness. And then I asked Kyla to help me mobilize All Souls to attend the final hearing on June 5th. And she did. And you all came, if not in person, in spirit. And between the Collins family members and all the loving people who stood up to racial injustice by coming to court to sit and bear witness to the hearing proceedings, the judge had to provide a larger courtroom to fit all of us. And he did. And even in the larger courtroom, we sat shoulder to shoulder and some spilled out into the hallway. And when the judge said the defendant's First Amendment rights had not been violated by the inclusion of racially insensitive material on the defendant's phone at trial, we silently rejoiced. And when the judge read his decision that the hate crime would not be a separate trial from the murder, we squirmed a little to keep our joy on the inside. And when the judge said the Alt-Right Nation Facebook page and other racist material associated with the defendant would not be suppressed at trial, we exhaled. and our excitement that all 3 motions by the defense were declined by the judge seeped out a bit as our bodies relaxed and our faces displayed our utter relief. And knowing my fellow parishioners were there with Dawn and her family simply because I had asked is a further testament about why I have returned to All Souls. We need each other to create the world that we want inside these walls and out. And so I ask each of you to help us do just that. Attend the upcoming trial for a day or multiple days beginning July 22nd. The information is in your order of service. And help us to fill not only the largest courtroom in that courthouse every day of the trial, but the entire courthouse. Sit with us as we stand for Second Lieutenant Richard Collins III. Thank you.
I want to begin by first thanking you, Deirdre, Maria Elise, Kyla, and Jose, for your honesty, vulnerability, and strength in sharing your stories with us today. I also want to take just a moment to recognize and acknowledge Mr. and Mrs. Collins who are with us here today. Our prayers are with you in this time. Yeah, thank you for being here with us. And I want to thank everyone who has come forward so far to share their stories with our Trust and Reconciliation team, or who have brought their anger or disappointment directly to me in many conversations I've had with folks over this last year. These conversations have helped me see and better understand the depth of pain that some still feel about the circumstances surrounding Reverend Susan's departure, and the ways in which her departure triggers other experiences of pain and trauma caused by white supremacy. I have, and I do, take responsibility for my role in this conflict that we've experienced. And I apologize for the harm that my actions, and sometimes inaction, has caused. Going forward, I'm committed to keep listening because I care deeply that Deirdre and Maria Elise and Jose and everyone who wants to still call All Souls their spiritual home can call All Souls their spiritual home. But I know that listening is just the beginning. So I've been learning. For me, this conflict has been a humbling experience of realizing I'm not as woke as I thought I was. Here's just one of the things I've learned through examining my part In the summer and fall of 2017, when a member of our congregation launched an escalating attack on the integrity and legitimacy of our associate minister, Reverend Susan Newman Moore, I and other church leaders had very different strategies than Reverend Susan for how to respond to that attack and reduce the harm it might cause. It's much clearer to me now how my strategy for confronting this attack was shaped by the privilege that I hold in this system as a white male senior minister. That privilege blinded me to the full danger that this threat posed to our African American female associate minister. It led me to pursue a course of action that was built on believing that we could work this out and that the process would lead to the right outcome. That's a course of action shaped by the privilege of having had the system work for you all your life. I also see the ways that the legacy of the closet shaped my response. One of the ways being gay conditioned me to respond to attacks was to turn away and wait for the bully to go away. And so sometimes it's not only our privilege, but our complicated, intersecting oppressions that complicate and trouble these matters. But I am truly sorry for the ways that I failed to see the full potential of that threat, and that the steps I did take to respond to it were not able to prevent harm to Reverend Susan or to our congregation. But I know that even learning isn't enough. I know that I need to change and grow, and so do all of us. So does our church. One tangible way that we have begun to build racial equity and inclusion into our church structure is by doing more to center the leadership of people of color. I am honored to now share leadership of our congregation with our new executive director, Tracy Hughes, who brings so much talent and experience to our leadership team. And Tracy and I work monthly with a coach to hone our practice of collaborative leadership, because it's not always easy. As the board reopens its search for another minister, I am committed to living into a new model of collaborative ministry, much like the collaborative relationship that Tracy and I now enjoy, where power is shared and each of us has an equal voice. When I was a kid, I played baseball. And I remember that the hardest thing for me in baseball was to step up to the plate again after striking out. If all of us who've made mistakes along the journey to building beloved community walked away from the challenge, there wouldn't be many folks left to do the work. And this is important work. And this is deeply spiritual work. And I believe that All Souls Church is the right place for all of us to be doing this work. Thank you for your commitment to helping this church become an ever more faithful expression of the beloved community. This morning's offering will now be given and received.